Good afternoon. Welcome to our second segment of the SEER interviews, Solar Energy Expo and Rally. Today is February 28th, and we're sitting here with Jonathan Frey from Frey Vineyards, and also with Keith Rutledge from Renewable Energy Development Institute and Sherwood Firewise, and many other endeavors that you're involved with. I thank Willits TV for providing us the space here, ready for producing these interviews as well. And go to our YouTube channel, check out our YouTube SEER videos that we have, like and subscribe, and we'd greatly appreciate it. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, Terry.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Jonathan, you and Katrina started your winery in
1980.
1980?
Actually 79.
Okay.
We got the ball rolling, yeah.
Okay.
And we were bonded in 1980.
All right. So it was up and going by the time when Phil Jerkinson came back from Oregon
Yeah.
to set up SEER.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we were working there. It was a struggling business, very small. Bootstrap all the way. We started out from basically zero. We did have a little vineyard that was planted by my parents' place in the 1960s. The Army Corps of Engineers was going to flood Tomkai Road and part of it. So then they planted this vineyard. Ended up being about 6 or 7 acres in the 60s when I was a teenager. So then they planted that to improve the value of the property in case it was flooded. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, we had this little vineyard there. Then I had come back. I had studied with Alan Chadwick, the horticultural teacher up in Covelo. He had a school up there. It was really interesting, and that's where we met. Anyway, then I came back home, worked out a deal with my dad to sort of take over the vineyard. We were doing truck gardening and selling at a farmer's market in town. We had started in the late 70s. And so
Nice.
Anyway, then gradually got into making wine off the little vineyard that was there. But at the same time, we were pretty broke, quite broke actually. And I was always interested in alternative energy and solar and the physics behind photovoltaics and stuff like that. So I built several concentrators, solar concentrators, and for making steam. Had a scheme to have a steam engine and concentrate the sunlight, and then and we had it at the Boonville Fair. This was a conic concentrator. So that was a lot of fun. I was doing that sort of in my spare time with a little shop that we had, and then built a little steam engine. And so anyway, then later, of course, that's kind of led into SEER. So then but then the business was pretty, took up quite a bit of time, needless to say. And we almost shut it down in the mid-'80s. It was just really a grind and pretty tough business to be in. So I kicked around thinking about other things I'd like to be involved in. I had heard about photovoltaics, and I was kind of interested in that. Then I read a little blurb in the Scientific American in 1989, which talked about solar car race happening over in Europe in Switzerland. That was called the Swiss Tour de Sol. Yeah. Kind of named after the Tour de France or whatever. Mm-hmm. So this was a little paragraph. It was in Scientific American. At the same time, it was my daughter's birthday, and I'd heard about Phil's sun cycles, so I came up to Willits looking to get her a bike for her birthday. And Phil was living in a little loft kind of above his shop there. And I said, hey, I just heard about this interesting solar car race. And Phil got all jazzed about it. He said, maybe we should try that here. And I was saying, yeah, that'd be a great idea. So I pulled it together to go over to the Swiss event. Got a hold of a guy named Urs Mundwieler. He was kind of the secretary for it. And he was kind of a solar, photovoltaic pioneer over in Switzerland. Mm-hmm. And so sent him a letter, and he sent one back and said, great, we'd love to have you. And I can, give you tips on how to, organize this thing. And they had been doing it for several years, and so they had a pretty well-oiled kind of event, organization going. And so we went over there with me and my brother, and this was in the summer of '89. And so then we got a press pass for the car. I said I was going to write an article for some local newspapers.
Oh, that's great.
So then we were able to, follow along with the whole pack of all the different vehicles. And this whole thing lasted about a week. It would go day to day from station to station, different little towns. And the towns would really come out in force. It was a great thing. Mm. And they would have, banquets and, celebrations and stuff like that. And they were pretty well financed by the one Swiss insurance company. So anyway, it was a cool, very well run thing. And so I got a lot of tips from them, and then came back here and talked to Phil again. So then I did a little presentation out in front of the library here in '89, and Keith was there. We did it out on the lawn, kind of, as I recall, right? Mm-hmm. And then I showed him slides, pictures I had taken of it, mm-hmm. and some of the paperwork from it. So that's kind of how the whole thing got kick-started. But then, of course, the other folks could never have happened without. And I was busy with all of my stuff, and Keith really stepped forward and took the bull by the horns. And
well, I think, to sort of tag on to what you're talking about, is that at the time Willits was really considered like a solar capital during the 80s. That there were several solar businesses here. I mean, Earth Lab and Sun Cycles, you mentioned those guys, but Solar Electric Specialties with the Padula family and Lawrence Jennings and Photron. And so there were, quite a bit of photovoltaic solar energy system, and not just local off-the-grid people. This was stuff that was going all around the planet. Navigation aids, military kind of things. We worked on a ice making plant that went over to Cairo. That was one of our projects at Photron. And one whole container full of batteries and another container full of the ice making equipment and whatever, and then solar panels that were folded in on them and folded out when they got there, that kind of thing. So, it was a lot of that kind of hotbed going on with the cars at the same time. So it was really a neat time where there was renewable energy and clean air transportation. California had passed the zero emission vehicle mandate in there, and then that was basically the impetus for Toyota and GM and those guys to actually build a factory level car. Because there was a mandate at the time that they had to have a certain percentage of their cars, So, I was coming more from the off-grid power system kind of thing, but we saw when we started talking, we all were, living this life up here. I built my own house, solar powered since 1984, all that kind of stuff. And so at that time, Richard and Karen Perez with Home Power Magazine, which was sort of the seeds of you can do this yourself, with
Absolutely.
Batteries and solar panels, sort of put out a challenge, basically said what we need is a series of events that highlight, these kinds of technologies. And so we took up the challenge, and, like Jonathan's saying, with Phil and Wayne with Solar Electric Specialties and myself and some others, we said, well, why don't we try to do an event here in Willits? And we had no sponsors, just a bunch of guys going, sure, let's do that, and invite everybody. And but I think the thing that you'll see through the theme that we were promoting was we weren't doing things ourselves as this group. We were promoting what other people were doing. So our goal was to highlight what the industry was doing, what these innovators were doing, what the scientists and the inventors that we got to come as a place to gather and network, rather than us trying to recreate the wheel or do the same kinds of things. A bunch of us came from different areas and could make those connections and bring them together. So we had the vehicles and we had the solar kind of stuff, but we also had just all kinds of crazy stuff. I mean, human-powered scroll saws making wood sculptures and mm-hmm. You can probably think of some
yeah, we had also a far out science section, which was dealing with different types of free energy stuff, far out physics and stuff like that. That was one category. So we had some very interesting characters in the 1990s. Well, starting in 1989, of course, with the cold fusion thing at the University of Utah, Pons and Fleischmann. So then they had a whole big thing. They had a presidential, like a commission on investigating cold fusion. But then you got into the fusion wars with the hot fusioneers versus the cold fusioneers. So there was a lot of politics involved with funding. So that was a whole interesting thing that was happening at that time. But then starting right about that time, 1990, 89, there was a huge groundswell of a lot of interesting, very far out physics, energy source research going on. There was Hal Fox, of course, that people jumped into it. So there was a period, maybe for almost 10 years, where there was a lot of that going on. Even though now we're now starting to see it come back somewhat after it kind of has been slumbering. So we had that section, and then every possible thing.
Well, environmental stuff,
Yeah.
ecologic homes kind of stuff, organic foods, all of
Correct.
those aspects. I love the kiddie cars. Was one of my favorite things. Was
Right.
those little bitty battery powered cars, and the little kids would get on those things and just start driving them around and around, noisy as heck. But that was
Yeah.
like, there they are, they're young, and how many of those people went on to get an EV that are driving around? They probably have kids by now too. It's been so long that who knows? But
One of the things that I mentioned in the previous interview with Phil and Wayne is that the context of the communication that had to happen. It was just a little over a year putting this event together in 1990. And so cell phones really weren't active.
No.
Pagers, no.
internet.
No.
No.
So it was really a lot of phone calls, mail, snail mail correspondence.
Send out flyers. You do it the old-fashioned way.
Yeah,
but
all the
people
graphics,
that-
hand layout stuff, and
plenty of ways to stay in touch back then. Back
Yeah,
in the-
but to
back
be
in
able
those
to
days.
achieve that within just a little over a year, where you tripled the town of Willits with these events, hotels were completely full, restaurants were running out of food because there was just that much influx of people to the event. Now, also wasn't without controversy. There were some pushback. There was a push me pull you from all sides of the community, but you did have swelling support from.
A lot of the people didn't know what to make of it. They thought it might be, because at that time there was the anti-logging protests, Redwood Summer and all that, so we got kind of lumped in with that. They didn't know what category to put this whole thing into. I remember there was some loggers driving by the event and shaking their fists, because they didn't really understand what they hadn't taken the time to.
but also Earth
check it
First also protested. One of the things we made a decision early on was
boy.
that we wanted to promote positive solutions. That as much as there is protesting and there needs to be people that stand up and say no, that's important. But what we wanted to try to do was say, well, that's fine if you say no, but what can we do? What are the options to clean air transportation or renewable energy or organic foods or whatever, And so that was part of we didn't want to put booths out there where people were protesting things. We wanted things where they had a positive solution. So we had the mothers of the loggers truck that went by yelling at us, and then right after that came the Earth Firsters yelling at us. So we figured we're right in the right spot because we're halfway in between. But it made an impact because people could see that we were trying to do something that was fun, entertainment, education, and fun. Those were sort of our buzzwords for this thing, because
Absolutely.
people aren't going to really learn something if they're not having a good time, and we wanted the families involved, and we had all kinds of gizmos and gadgets to make it fun. But it was a real breakthrough. Politically, we did the Declaration of Energy Independence during that
Right.
time and delivered things to the governor's mansion. Jerry Brown came out for one of the events.
did.
So I think the thing that was, back to what you were talking about, the controversy, like Jonathan's saying, people didn't really know what to make of this, not only from us itself, but also this event, because the biggest thing that had happened in Willits up until that time was the Frontier Days once a year, which is horses and steam-powered things and whatever, and it's a great vintage, historic kind of a thing, and it draws a lot of people. Well, we were in their space as city property, but here was this other group that wasn't the cowboys and the ranchers and whatever. It was these sort of hippies and back to the landers and who knows what's, and putting on this event, and all of a sudden there's thousands of people coming to town. They're like, wait a minute, what's going on here?
Yeah.
So we did have raise a few eyebrows, but overall, like you said, the merchants were totally happy. All the lodging and everything else is. I was fascinated that we had some of the craziest. When we look at the films of the craziest vehicles on the road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know, if we had to try to do that today, I just don't think
Ooh,
you know.
you wouldn't be able to do it today, I
A
don't
little
think, in the
crazy.
current.
But we were
Yeah.
very safe. I mean, there weren't really any kind of major incidents or whatever. I think there was a battery spill that happened on the way. Somebody dropped some batteries.
One of them drove into a ditch. They were doing a loop around the whole valley here
Yeah.
with all their vehicles. We contacted people who were studying at colleges and high schools even, and at that time there was the big solar race that went across Australia. It was making waves. And so we had all
Sun
those
Racer, I
folks.
think that was called.
Yeah, the Sun Racer. So it was kind of happening around then. And so we had quite a cast of characters, a lot of scientists and nerds and techno geeks and
Well, and Clark Beasley with the
yeah.
Electrothon, which was this another one of these sort of innovative. How far can you go on a single charge in a very small, efficient vehicle, sort of like a powered pine box derby almost, you know? And these guys would go looping around and around. Well, Clark was a world record holder, and we got him here with a whole clan of everything from high school students all the way through universities, making these very efficient, very small vehicles. And again, it's an engineering challenge, so you get that it's fun, it's racing, but it's also technology and advancing better controllers and better batteries and better motors, so we were right at the tip of all that.
One of the things that I did not know until my interview with Wayne and Phil was the selling of the corporate booths that sponsored the high school in Hawaii. It sponsored Western University students, engineering students, Cal Poly,
Boston.
Yeah, that's that sort of collective bringing together, which still kind of put you guys outside the realm of the loggers and the earth firsters, sitting there right in the middle. I have here, this is Richard Jurgensen provided this for me. This is after 1990. Actually 1991. This is the strategy audit for moving forward into 93. Now, 93 turned out to be your more of a policy conference.
Well, actually, let's wind it back a little bit,
Okay.
because I think an important point to make in the 1990, back to the sort of the controversy and whatever else, is that when we did that, we had never thought about doing anything other than having a Solar Energy Expo and Rally. And there it was. And when it was over and we were all nearly dead from all that exertion, people
didn't
said,
know what was gonna happen.
Well,
We
next
gotta-"
year, people started saying, next year, this, and we said, what do you mean next year? I mean, we could barely, survive this thing at all. So that was an interesting piece of it.
Broke even. We were selling tickets for
Yeah.
$5. If we wouldn't have had the sponsorship from the booths, it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
I think our budget
Some
was right
advertisers
around
and-
40,000-50,000, and we completely maxed it out, but we flat out broke even, barely. And we didn't know if we would up until the tickets came in.
Yeah.
And,
We never had a major sponsor. I mean, this wasn't
Yeah.
like a GM sponsored event or anything else is like that. It was all just scratch. We got advertisers and attendees and booth fees and all that kind of junk.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I just wanted to make that point that we didn't really plan on having more than one expo. And so when we had SEER 91, we didn't know if that would be, is this going to be even better or with the same people, more? And it turned out to be great, to the point where we did 92 as well. And even into, when we got to 93, like you say, we said, why don't we do some kind of a policy related, because this is now GM and Toyota and the guys that had made the cars, they were suing the state of California to overturn the zero emission vehicle mandate.
Who killed the electric car?
Exactly. And they
Great
ended up
documentary.
taking them back and crushing them and whatever. So there was this sort of blip where the things were taken off and then got crushed for quite a while before EV kind of technology came back. So that was sort of another, I just wanted to mention that as another controversial kind of thing. It was not so much PG&E. I mean, the utility companies were seeing the benefits of this, and military and otherwise, but so there wasn't so much electrical kind of competition, but the vehicle people, I think, were definitely threatened in the sense that they weren't ready to take on the battery-powered vehicles at that time.
And the expo part of this event was really to test the endurance of an EV car.
That
And
was the
rally.
the rally.
Yeah, the expo was different. That was
Sorry.
booths and people showcasing
Right.
products for, home solar and every.
And workshops, we had,
Yeah.
battery workshops, solar
Right.
workshops, how to build this, how to do that. And
Yeah.
so a lot of education, a lot of training in that technology-oriented kind of thing. But the vehicle side, the rally was an endurance kind of,
Yeah.
both driving around the valley as well as some other, we had tractor pull, electric tractors in the
We had
rodeo
the
grounds.
electric, police car race. We
Yeah.
had drag races finally. We had boats
Yeah,
down at Lake Mendocino.
in 94.
But we had those two sections. One was the rally, and then the one was the expo and, educational seminars and stuff like that. Finally, for the last one, that was strictly educational seminar
Yeah.
or a conference of some pretty heavyweight scientists and everything. Keith organized that, basically. That was the last one, which didn't include the rallies and everything.
Yeah, a lot of the people that attended those events were part of that, but that one we had taken on trying to highlight some of the real key inventors, both somebody like Stan Ovshinsky, which is he's really well known not only for unisolar but also nickel metal hydride batteries, and he holds tons of patents, just an amazing scientist, and he really, supported the kind of work we were doing. But like Jonathan's saying, a little bit more far out people, like a guy named Alvin Marks that had a sub-micron antenna, photovoltaic device, and a Quinsor quantum storage device.
Right.
But Stan Myers is one of my
Myers,
favorite.
what
In a story
character.
to this day, and so that was the other controversy. When you said controversy, was that Stan Myers died suspiciously along the way, and he had mentioned he had death threats, and he was the kind of guy running a car off of water was his thing. And I had been to his place up in Ohio, met with him several times and whatever, and it was very, very weird the way he passed, and then also what happened to his organization after he passed. So we were very fortunate to have him here, as controversial as he was. But
Yeah.
but that was another, that whole idea of pushing the envelope a little bit.
As the story goes, he was ordering dessert with some friends at a restaurant.
Yeah.
And as soon as he took a bite of it, he got up and ran outside the restaurant. Somebody's poisoned me. Whether that's factual or not, it's undetermined. But certainly at that time, it certainly would scratch the head. He's using water to power his vehicle.
Yeah, that was, it was not just him, there was a whole mindset of all that's maybe, industry feeling threatened back then. Of course, this was 30 years ago, and you never knew what could happen to you if you came out with something that was going to disrupt the, economics and stuff. So, and I suppose, there's still, it's hard to say nowadays, it's changed a little bit. All that stuff.
I don't know, with all the UAPs and everything we're seeing around.
Yeah,
it's
UAPs,
what do
don't
we
forget
really know
about
about all that stuff? I don't know.
Right.
So you had 3 years of the Expo and Rally, 90, 91, 92. Then you had the policy invitational in 93, and then 94 was kind of the grandiose. You grew so large that you had to move down to the Ukiah Fairgrounds.
There was a hiatus for a year, right? In
Well, we did the conference in 93,
yeah,
and then we did SEER in 94, and then we did conference in 95.
95.
yeah,
Yeah. So that 1 year was allowed us to figure out if we were going to do another expo or not, and we realized that it had grown beyond the facilities here. I mean, the first year we were in the spray field from the sewer system out in a dirt field,
Right.
with just dust
They
going
put
up
us out in
everywhere
the-
and whatever. And then we moved over to the city park, for 91 and 92, and sort of stepped on some toes that were, turf kind of related things. But by the time 94 came along, we took over the entire Ukiah Fairgrounds,
Yeah.
the racetrack there. We even had solar boats at Lake Mendocino. We had solar cars coming across the Golden Gate Bridge, from
we
San
came from
Francisco.
north and south. That was part of the rally, and
Yeah,
with a lot of fanfare. And so we were really, whooping it up and checkered flags flying and all this kind of stuff.
Well, there's quite a few pictures from the Palace of Fine Arts where there's several of the schools, the young adults with their cars. Quite a few celebrities as well that were in attendance.
Ed Begley was a
Yeah.
big supporter.
Yeah.
And Howard Latofsky, who's passed at this point, but he was an unbelievable character in all this. I mean, Jonathan mentioned the police car race. I mean, there's
Yeah.
just these little anecdotal stories of how he got the police involved, and we had an electric car. They wanted to race the cop car, and the cops ended up putting nitro injection into their cop car to try to spoof him.
But they still couldn't beat the electric car because it has so much torque. So,
Yeah.
Huh.
And then you mentioned the electric drag racer too, and this was
Yeah.
basically a little accumulator, and so you just sit there and charge this hydraulic accumulator,
Yeah,
and then
the
pop it all
Waymo.
off in one big jolt, and these big giant dragster tires.
that was the lead sled.
The leads.
Yeah,
Oh, that's Green Dragon. What was that
thing
one?
that thing really hauled ass.
Oh yeah.
You also had the
Lead
Soul
sled.
Train that
Had the
Phil
Soul Train. Right.
in part built as well.
Well, and again, that was another historic from Willits to Ukiah. Chris Baldo took the Miss Mendocino on a ride on the Soul Train from Willits to Ukiah. I mean, it just had never happened before. Making that kind of history that, little steps here and there. And it's amazing that
Yeah, we'd have meetings every week and then brainstorm and come up with some far out concepts. Not only a fraction of which made it into reality.
Where we are now, 35 years, how different is our conditions as far as energy is concerned? Have we made significant advances, or are we kind of stagnant?
It's been gratifying to see the rise of the electric cars and hybrids and stuff. There was a real slowdown there when there was a lot of pushback, in the 90s, and then the state had different mandates that kept getting pushed back for what fraction of the cars sold would be more, electric and stuff like that. But then nowadays, of course, it's a household word, and many people do have electric cars. They go up and down in, popularity, and there's still a lot of more things that could be done in terms of batteries. Batteries, of course, have always been the weak link in the whole, alternative energy scene. So that's constantly changing.
Well, I think, one of the things we said when we started the whole thing was that one of our goals, solar at that point was like $15 or $20 or $30 a watt. I mean,
Yeah.
it was just crazy prices. So we'd like to see solar down to like $1 a watt, and we'd like to see electric cars on all the dealers' parking lot, on dealer lots. And
Lo and behold,
it took 30 years, not 10 or 15 or 20,
Yeah,
but it took a long
pretty-
time. But it, again, is that progress because people were pushing, and it was those little things. I keep thinking about the kids that came to those events and saw things. I think about the kids that have been at my house that have been there and stayed the week with an off-grid house, and they know solar that works. Solar hot water, solar electric. So when somebody says, "Hey, that stuff doesn't work," they go, I know people that live that way, So that's the important thing about doing things, not talking about it, but actually implementing, helping others to do that too, finding ways to, what are the barriers? Like Reddy ended up getting into other types of things, renewable energy development, getting into policy things like the off-grid home mortgage, which was to get Fannie Mae to allow homes that had private power systems to get
Yes.
a conforming mortgage.
that was Keith's thing. Keith worked for the bank, of course, here in Willits, and
Yeah.
had a background in finance.
Another great sponsor. The bank was really helpful for us.
Well, it helped me with my career.
Yeah.
That policy change through Fannie Mae. I did construction loans all over the United States. That were, a lot of them were off grid or straw bale for that matter. So there was advancements with that. I know when I worked for the local bank here, they didn't bat an eye about a property that's off grid on 200 acres. So they put their money where their mouth was, which is great to see. A lot of banks won't do that. It's like off grid, no. So
Well, and now it's pretty much, it's on television every day, right? People are knocking on people's doors. Hey, it's free. We'll put it on your house for nothing.
Yeah.
It's almost become a scam or something. It's like
But
too
it
successful.
keeps on going. Now you have the microgrid controversy because it poses a counter to the large, investor-owned, electric companies. So they're hashing that out right now with, PG&E. It's, as we know, they keep raising rates, and they're opting for a solar farm kind of approach and still using the grid, and they have the various laws and tax breaks to make that happen, guaranteed profit and so on. So I signed up with the Solar Rights Group, Solar Rights Alliance, and so they've been doing some good stuff lately as far as trying to cut through the propaganda and really trying to go for a microgrid concept, which makes so much sense. But of course, it does threaten a lot of big time money. So there's still controversies brewing out there and it's interesting to see it all play out.
It's interesting how there was the Arab oil embargo kind of thing back in the 70s was a big shock, and so that was sort of early on about, wow, maybe we need energy independence with renewables because of an oil shortage, and peak oil was talked about, and then of course Earth Day and climate and all the issues around that became sort of, gee, this isn't good for the environment, and now it's like, wait a minute, we might not even survive if we don't do something. So that's part of that clash of doing business as usual, which is the way things go, inertia, unless you change things, and then so that means people have to do something different, and there's enough financial incentives now to do things, and with financing and good technology and all that, people can actually implement this kind of stuff. But I think, like Jonathan said, storage has been one of the major, whether it's homes or vehicles. The grid is people wanting to do all electric cars and homes, heat pumps, go all electric, get rid of the gas. That's going to really strain the utility grid unless there's a way to get distributed storage in the same way that there's distributed solar. That if people have solar panels on their home, they're generating power all throughout the grid. And if there's little batteries throughout the grid, that would help take that off, along with some big ones too. You want that. But like right now, between Humboldt County to the north and Sonoma County to the south, that grid, that whole highway of power line is completely packed. They can't put any more in. So in Humboldt County, they can't take more power. They're having home moratoriums there. They're building moratoriums where you can't build a house because they can't get power. And so, that's already impacting just that thought that somebody's saying we can't build a house because we don't have enough electricity in this area. What an opportunity for remote power, for off-grid power, for solar, for storage, grid interactive. All those things become, again, cost-effective because now we're at a place where we have to do that kind of stuff.
Who were the artists that did these posters?
Yeah, I was going to mention, got to say Larry Todd a few times.
Okay.
And Kathy Griffin was the other person that did the graphics person. Dave Mullen did a lot of painting and stuff, the big displays, whatever. But
this was Larry Todd.
Yeah, the original logo stuff, that was Larry's thing.
Can you bring up one of those posters and let's discuss some of the artists that were involved with this?
That's the first one there, the SEER 90. Yeah, Larry Todd did the whole logo thing here, which ended up being on our various T-shirts. And this was the SEER 94 upheaval of alternative energy.
I love it.
And there's that 94.
There's 4 of them here.
Yeah.
This one, you want to grab one? There's another one.
There's that SEER 94. That was the one we did at the
Line
Ukiah
them all up
Fairgrounds. But
Can we?
close enough.
Okay.
Close up.
Like you said, they'll take pictures of them later.
Yeah.
But that, the funny part to me, as you're saying, this is way before computer graphic kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
This is handmade graphics, having to do half tones and cut them and paste them, stick them into a little, layout boards and all that kind of stuff. It was a very big production. Kathy Griffin was.
Coincided with the comet hitting Jupiter. Oh, here it is.
Mm-hmm.
Jupiter Comet Watch. That was a really big deal at that time.
Yep.
I had no
You
idea.
probably remember that. It was all over the headlines, and this comet, and then it broke into pieces.
Yep.
And then bluey, it hit Jupiter, one after another, with each one the force of
And I had my telescope out to
thousands
do
of
that
atomic
too, and
bombs. Right.
we were watching it because we weren't able to actually see it
Pretty-
hit,
Yeah.
but as Jupiter turned, you could see the black dot show up where it had hit.
Yeah.
It was
Unbelievable.
So cool. Yeah.
Right. And we're lucky to have Jupiter because it sucks away a lot of bad comets that would otherwise hammer us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What is it? 2032 or 2034, we're supposed to have another.
Well, that's a rocky asteroid, but
Yeah.
Jupiter, throughout the history of the solar system, as you guys probably know, has served as the guardian of the inner planets by sucking away
Sucking
so
everything.
many comets that come shaking down from the whatever Oort
Oort
cloud.
cloud, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Kuiper
amazing.
belt.
It's a jungle out there for sure.
I'm just curious that we felt like we've come so far. What can be done in the future? We talked about microgrids, which is an opportunity. But where do you see the next steps or going to the next level? Certainly, there's going to be some pushback from big corporations or the governments or.
Microgrids have been basically outlawed, and well, Spain has pushed back really hard against them. The electric companies, for example, and then here also. So that's an interesting political controversy.
Yeah.
The whole thing about microgrids. I think ultimately, especially, everything's driven by what is the latest kinds of tech. I don't know when that's going to end. It could hit a wall where you've done everything you can as far as the application of technique, and that's pure speculation, more philosophical, let's say. But what's going to be the ultimate? People started chipping rocks together, and then they went from there. And if it wasn't us, it'd probably maybe be some other critter on the planet doing what we're doing. Who the heck knows? It's complete speculation. But so yeah, I think Keith knows a lot about
Well,
it.
to me, that's
Yeah.
part of the discussion, is that not only population and the environment, and I mean those are big constraints, but even within the grid, we're fortunate here in our area to have the community choice aggregation, which allows other entities to produce electricity, like a nonprofit like Sonoma Clean Power, which is made up of the cities and the counties, and so that's like a publicly owned source of electricity, so we can get the power itself at the least cost. And they have some innovative programs to promote energy efficiency, like heat pumps and solar, and paying people a little bit more for net metering than you get from the utility. The grid itself, though, when you look at the infrastructure, and that's really just like roads. I mean, we have a certain amount of infrastructure that's been done over the past 100 years that's going to be really difficult to change and even to upgrade. Like I was talking about the north-south transmission lines, these big, huge power lines. I mean, that's a giant easement, and the wires have to be far enough apart because there's a lot of power there. It's not like you can just say, okay, let's carve another channel next to that somehow. So maybe there's a way to improve that transmission aspect of things. And of course, Tesla initially had the whole wireless power concept, and we sort of use that now with all of our wireless phones and internet and every other kind of thing. So that's power flying through the atmosphere. It's just not powering homes. And so that's where I think, again, distributed resources, and that's going to be renewable at the site, but also storage at the site. You could make hydrogen and run a fuel cell. You could have a battery of various sorts. There's flywheel storage, there's gravity storage. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different kinds of ways of storing energy. But in a way, I feel like it's like if every house needs to have water and power, but they should have storage and generation as well. And if everybody had that on the apartment complexes and all the stores, and everybody just had that built into their system, those various components, and they could be power backup as well for public safety. So if there's outages, short-term, long-term, all of those things play into the long-term aspects, but it takes money to do all that stuff. So that's where the incentives have to be there. There's financing that's really important to make that happen. So our country has gone up and down as far as the government supporting things like that, and the industry fighting back to try to slow it down until they can control it. I mean, the oil companies own most of the solar panel manufacturing for quite a while. Now it's mostly overseas.
Then they kind of jumped out of it.
Yeah, well, the Chinese took over and they couldn't compete with
Right.
them. So
Now it's kind of swinging the opposite way with solar panel manufacturer. But just like Keith says, there's a lot of tools that we have right now, but it's all depending on how you integrate them and put them together. And then even some, there's like the sun cell, right? This has to do with far out physics. That's a possibility.
Yeah, anything to do with
Randall-
cold fusion.
Randall Mills.
Mhm.
That's not fusion, but it's a type of chemical reaction that people. But that's kind of fringe. But he's actually made them, and we would follow that back in the 90s. They'd be doing arcs through vacuums and through, hydrogen gas, and funny things are going on. So there's still that whole needs to be further explored. I was looking at his stuff recently, and he's built them. They're.
Can you talk about the volunteers that you had at these multiple events
Oh, yeah.
and how important they were to, the transition of getting people here?
Yeah, none of this could have happened without
No,
literally
we
dozens and dozens of people of all ages
Yeah.
and from all backgrounds, and some of them are not with us anymore at this point, but I mean,
Right.
just people that put in days and days and days of really hard work. And we didn't have any money. I mean, this is all about
Yeah.
spirit, and just being, wanting to do it so badly that people would join in. The Chamber of Commerce early on was a good support. Lynn Kennelly was sort of the head of that. The merchants were generous as far as donating things for raffles and whatever else is. Musicians that came, a lot of the stuff we did, we just asked for whatever they could, the minimum that they needed to help us out because we just didn't have money. We got a lot of support from most of the grassroots. I mean, again, we didn't have big accounts from Arco or Exxon or any of these kind of guys, or GM or Toyota. They did bring their cars, though. We had a GM EV1 here. We had the Toyota RAV4 all electric here. We even had Roger Billings with his
Yeah.
hydrogen fuel cell
Right.
car, which is again is a real novelty guy.
Yeah, the old EV1. That was a great car. Then they crushed them all.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories you mentioned. I was
junkyard.
working at the bank at the time, and
Crazy.
and the bank president Richard Willoughby.
People tried to keep theirs,
yeah.
but then they say, no, you have to give
Yeah.
it back, and we're going to crush it.
Yeah, and people were crying over that stuff.
They were literally crying.
Anyway, I took Richard out in the EV1 out into the Central Valley out there because he's going, this thing's really fast, I go, come on, and get in that thing. And I was looking around both there and just floored it, man. And his head went flying back and went, whoa!
That was a fantastic car. Is
Yeah.
there any single one left? I don't think so.
Somebody bound it, got scarfed
I
one
think
up and
they-
taken it overseas or something. I don't know.
They-
Vladimir has one probably.
They, hunted him down. It was really pretty pathetic. But
Yeah.
anyway.
Do you guys have any other additional things that you would like to discuss?
Well, let's stay on the volunteers. So
Yeah,
we
please.
mentioned, like Larry Todd, just an unbelievable talent. All of our stuff has Larry Todd graphics throughout it, and gave all of us, gave SEER and Reddy, an instant face of something unusual but very identifiable and very artistic. And Larry's a real talent. He's passed on as well recently, but we were blessed to have his creative capability. And then I mentioned Kathy Griffin as another person that graphics-wise, that early on was putting all of our stuff together, the big programs that we did, the multi-page programs, all those kinds of things. Dave Mullen is another, Dave and his son Blair, just again always doing something, painting or building or moving things around. Tim Hulse, I remember Tim. I could go on and on. There's a bunch of people that did, but again, the fun part of it was people from all over. It wasn't like just the hippies or just the techie people or whatever. It was moms and dads and kids, and it was a whole broad spectrum of people because it was interesting and fun. And I think that's what we're missing. What I feel like is missing now, as far as moving forward. Reddy has been continuing to try to bring younger people in and whatever. And when we did the last poll that we did of what was important to these young people, self-driving cars was the number one item that they thought was the most important thing to them. Not energy independence or clean food or abundant water or anything like that. It was like, I just want a self-driving car.
Yeah, the coach with the chauffeur. Jump right in.
in a video game. Yeah,
Okay,
play.
Well, they have the Waymos in the Marina
It's
District
happening.
that are
You know, again, it's a
Yeah.
great indication of that's what's happening. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, that was accurate polling data. Wasn't good for our nonprofit of saying, well, wait a minute, how does that fit?
We had some anti-gravity stuff too, so that
Good.
way you can fly around, you can tear up all the pavement. It was a popular theme.
Yeah, and those gliders, and those
far out physics department.
ion engine stuff is really happening. You know,
Here's those ions, those one-way ion fed by microwave.
Yeah.
So it's like a reactionless drive, which is the holy grail of space drive. You
and
know?
with all the UAPs flying around, all this
Yeah,
stuff
yeah.
that's happening.
There you
Who
go.
knows where that is and what that is? And
Right.
so you know, there are breakthroughs like
Tear
that.
all that
could happen.
pavement up.
Yeah, yeah, or teleport. I mean, you know, heck, why bother?
That's a whole nother.
Mostly
That
got you
seems too
together.
tough.
Now, were these the posters that got distributed down throughout the Bay Area? Or
Things
were they-
like that.
Okay.
Yeah, we made up a bunch of those and put them up all over. We also had postcard sizes. We had a billboard up north of town here.
wow.
You know, it was did a lot. Oh, that was when we had across Main Street by where JD Red House is now. There used to be a big pole on either side of Main Street with a cable going across where you could hang a banner.
Yeah.
And we hung the banner there a couple of years in a row. That was